In the middle of the 19th century, Japan looked like the next country on the list to be colonized. China was being carved into spheres of influence. India was already under British rule. Southeast Asia was split between European empires. And Japan? It was seen as weak, isolated, and behind, a target. But instead of becoming a colony, Japan did something almost no non-Western country managed in that era. It transformed itself, fast, brutally, and deliberately into a modern industrial and military power. So fast that within a few decades, it went from being the potential victim of imperialism to being an imperial power itself. This is the story of how Japan came within a few years of being forced into colonization, and the shocking decisions, betrayals, and risks that changed its fate. Because if just a few key choices had gone differently, the map of Asia and the 20th century would look completely different. To understand how close Japan came to disaster, you have to understand where it started. For over 200 years, Japan had been largely closed off from the outside world. Under the Tokugawa Shogunate, the country was stable but isolated. Foreign trade was tightly restricted. Japanese citizens were forbidden from leaving under threat of death. Christian missionaries were banned. Only a handful of Dutch and Chinese merchants were allowed limited access through the port of Nagasaki. Inside Japan, this system created a long period of internal peace. But outside, the world was changing fast. Steamships, industrial factories, modern armies, global empires projecting power across oceans. By the early 1800s, Western powers were no longer just trading with Asia. They were conquering it. Britain had taken large parts of India. France was moving into Indochina. The United States was expanding across the Pacific. And China, once seen as untouchable, was being pressured into unequal treaties after military defeats. Japan watched all of this from behind its walls. And the people in charge knew, even if they didn't say it out loud, this isolation could not last forever. The question was not if the outside world would break in. It was when, and on what terms. That when arrived in 1853. An American naval officer, Commodore Matthew Perry, sailed into Tokyo Bay with a squadron of steam-powered warships. To the Japanese, these were not just ships. They were black, smoke-belching monsters. They moved against the wind. They carried heavy modern cannons. They looked like the future. And they were parked in Japan's harbor. Perry carried a message from the United States government. Open your ports, allow trade, treat our ships and sailors fairly, or face the consequences. He did not need to spell out the consequences. Everyone in the room understood. China had already been forced into unequal treaties after military defeats. Japan had no modern navy, no industrial base, no experience fighting a major Western power. If the United States decided to use force, Japan would almost certainly lose. Perry left, promising to return the next year for an answer. When he came back in 1854 with an even larger fleet, the Tokugawa Shogunate signed the Convention of Kanagawa. Japan opened 2 ports to American ships. It agreed to treat shipwrecked sailors humanely. It allowed a U.S. consul to reside in Japan. This was not a treaty between equals. It was the first crack in the wall. And once one Western power got in, others followed. Britain, Russia, France, the Netherlands. Each demanded similar agreements. Each treaty chipped away at Japanese sovereignty. Tariffs were limited. Legal jurisdiction over foreigners was restricted. Japan could not fully control its own borders or laws. These were the same kinds of unequal treaties that had been imposed on China. And for many Japanese intellectuals and samurai, the message was clear. If this continued, Japan would not just be pressured, it would be dominated, possibly colonized. The external threat was bad enough. The internal reaction made it worse. The Tokugawa Shogunate had justified its rule by claiming it could protect Japan. Now it had just signed a series of humiliating treaties under threat of force. Its legitimacy collapsed. Across the country, samurai, scholars, and regional lords began to argue over what to do. Some wanted to expel the foreigners at any cost. Some wanted to open the country and modernize quickly. Some wanted to overthrow the shogunate entirely. Violence increased. Foreigners were attacked. Ships were fired on. Retaliatory bombardments followed. In 1863, the Choshu domain fired on foreign ships in the Shimonoseki Strait. Western navies responded by bombarding Choshu's fortifications. The result was devastating. Traditional samurai forces, no matter how brave, could not stand against modern naval artillery. The lesson was brutal and simple. Courage was not enough. Technology mattered. Organization mattered. Industrial capacity mattered. If Japan wanted to avoid being dominated, it would have to change, not just its weapons, but its entire system. And time was running out. Because while Japan argued with itself, the outside world was watching. And empires do not wait forever. By the mid-1860s, the crisis reached its peak. The Tokugawa Shogunate was weak. Its authority was challenged by powerful domains in the south and west, especially Satsuma and Choshu. These domains had seen what happened when traditional forces met modern firepower. They had begun secretly buying Western weapons, training troops in new tactics, building relationships with foreign merchants. They were preparing for a different kind of Japan. In 1867, the young Emperor Meiji was elevated to a more central political role. Anti-Tokugawa forces used his authority to legitimize their movement. The message was simple: restore power to the emperor, end the shogunate, build a new state that could stand against the West. Civil war followed. The Boshin War lasted from 1868 to 1869. It was not a massive, decades-long conflict, but it was decisive. Tokugawa forces were defeated. The shogunate collapsed. The Meiji government took power, and with it, Japan began one of the most rapid transformations in modern history. This was the turning point. If the Tokugawa had held on longer, if the country had remained divided, if modernization had been delayed by even a decade, the pressure from outside might have become overwhelming. Instead, Japan now had a central government that could make hard decisions and enforce them. The new Meiji leaders understood the stakes. They were not trying to slowly improve Japan. They were trying to save it. Their strategy was brutally pragmatic. Learn from the West. Adopt what works. Discard what does not. Do it fast. They sent missions abroad to study Western industry, law, education, and military systems. They hired foreign experts to help build railways, factories, and modern institutions. They reorganized the army and navy along European lines. They abolished the old feudal domains and replaced them with a centralized prefecture system. They ended the samurai class as a privileged military caste. They introduced conscription, creating a national army drawn from the common people. They built schools, telegraph lines, and a modern bureaucracy. They changed the calendar. They changed the dress code for officials. They changed the way the state saw itself. All of this was controversial. Many samurai lost their status and income. Some rebelled. The most famous uprising, the Satsuma Rebellion of 1877, was led by former samurai who felt betrayed by the new order. It was crushed by the very modern army the Meiji government had built. The message was clear. There would be no going back. Japan would modernize, even if it had to fight part of its own past to do it. And while this was happening, the unequal treaties still remained. Japan was not yet fully sovereign, but the direction was unmistakable.